Welcome back into another episode of Furtado and Seymour. I'm Jake Seymour, and joined alongside me is Noah Furtado and Ryan Score, coming from across America in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Hawaii, coming from all over the world to talk about the NBA Finals today.
Yeah, basketball.
Big basketball fans right here, three of us.
It's coming to an end here. Got two more games left. This next one, I think we're going to 7. So
You were going to 7? I don't.
Already
I think
jumping
we're going
to
to 7.
prediction.
I do think we're going to 7. I think with Boston, you look at the way they've bounced back from losses throughout the postseason. We brought it up in the last show. Their undefeated record after losses, regardless of whether they're at home or on the road, but the fact that they're going back to Boston, to me, that's a huge advantage for them. And the fact that both teams, Golden State and Boston, had off games even, I'd say in Game 5, it's going to be a close one. But I think the home court advantage gives them an edge.
I just think Golden State has more firepower, though, right? Like, I mean, you just said it, 2 off days, or two teams that just had an off day themselves in Game 5, and Golden State prevailed because they've just got that little bit more options here and there. I mean, you look at Steph, who had a historically bad game for him in Game 5. That's really the first time. So he comes off the heels of that Game 4 and then just dominates in Game 5, right? And then Klay Thompson wasn't at it. Draymond actually had his best game he's had all series. But Andrew Wiggins, he took over. And I think you look beyond that. Jordan Poole can give them an option, right? If they really, really need offense, they can go to some bodies. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if Boston has that. If Tatum is struggling, yeah, Jaylen Brown can play. And Horford's had a great postseason. But other than that, I don't see Marcus Smart being the same fourth option as Jordan Poole is. Like, that's to me the difference, right? As you go Steph, Tatum, and then you've got, we'll call it Klay and Brown, and then you've got Horford, and you've got Wiggins, and then you've got Poole versus Smart, right? The fourth option is Jordan Poole, who's a lights-out shooter and has shown as much so far this year. But then the fourth option for Boston is Marcus Smart, and I think Golden State aren't going to let it go to 7.
Is that you ranking the players there, or are you putting like the tiers of where they're at? Because I don't think Tatum's the second best player. I don't think Tatum's the second best player.
No, I'm saying he's the best player on Boston. He's the best player. No, but he's the best player on Boston. No. Isn't he? Yes, he's the best. It
sounded like we were talking about scoring options there.
Scoring options, correct. He's the best scorer. Game 7.
Fine, if you want to give a scoring, sure.
Jaylen Brown's not taking the last shot.
Of course, I'm not saying that. My point is, if you look at these last 5 games, if you look at these last 5 games that the Celtics have played, right, Jayson Tatum has not been the best player on the floor. But Jaylen Brown played lights out. And up until Game 5, he had a really solid game. And Tatum just hasn't shown up really since Game 7 in Miami. I don't know what's happened there with Tatum. He's kind of just fallen off a cliff. You look at his stat line, it's not too bad. 23.2 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 7 assists a game in those 5 games. But there's something about him that's off. He's missing those shots. He's not aggressive. He's not attacking the basket with a purpose. He just drives and kicks out. And that's been the Celtics offense all season, right? We've seen this all season. But we're at a point now where the Warriors are starting to collapse into that and not allowing the kick out 3 or closing out really well on the arc, right? And Tatum needs to just go up sometimes and draw the foul and get to the free throw line. And he hasn't done that. And that's something that's really hurt him and has really amplified that turnover problem that he's had.
He also has hit free throws. No one's hit free throws. I mean, Game 5, they were awful, right? I mean, that was probably the worst free throw shooting performance I've seen in 4 or 5 years in an NBA Finals game. That was terrible.
That's one of the things. It's the little things that really hurt them in Game 5, and that's what makes it worrisome. Because you mentioned Tatum, his stat line really hasn't been terrible from game to game. He's had his moments. Game 5, I'm looking at this right now. Top shooting performance as far as efficiency goes, field goal percentage and things like that. He had 27 points, 10 rebounds. He's been doing his thing, and especially in Game 5. And so when you see that, but also see the Celtics not get 100 points, not to finish below that sort of marker in today's NBA is a pretty bad feat, especially how Boston has kind of made their way into the paint, being able to frequent their points with high percentage looks. It was in Game 5, Golden State that had that advantage as far as points in the paint. And one thing you have to keep in mind here is that when Boston gives up the ball, turnovers, that leads into transition points, and that gives Golden State that much more opportunity to get their kind of high percentage looks. Because when Boston is set up in half-court defense, it's a lot harder for Golden State. We've seen to be able to get those kinds of looks, and they have to rely on their three-point shooting, which, again, you'll take, I think, if you're Steve Kerr. But at the same time, you always are going to want or prefer the layup or the floater inside as opposed to a contested look on the three-point line. So that's one of the things that they really need to try and limit in this next game. Just to finish the series, they want to try and take care of the ball. It's a very simple thing because when their defense is set up, Golden State has a lot more difficulty. Thank you. Has a lot more difficulty really consistently getting into their sets and getting easy baskets consistently.
Jake, is that on Tatum though? Like that's, to me,
I mean, it has to be
on Tatum, and you're presenting it as though it is. I don't think that's on Tatum. I think that
when you're the best player on your team and you're in the finals, all NBA first team guy, and he wants to say, he had that sound heading into the finals where he said something like, I don't know who told me I was a superstar. I never said that. I don't know what this is all about. Well, when you go on podcasts like JJ Redick's podcast, The Old Man of the Three, and you say, oh, I should have been on the All NBA first team, and then you get it. Like those are the 5 best players in the league, and then you win the Eastern Conference MVP. You lead your team out of the Eastern Conference to the finals. You're a superstar at this point. Now, whether we want to talk about that's a longevity thing, but in this moment, as of June 2022, Jayson Tatum is a superstar in this series. You can't just put up an egg and vanish. That's not how this works. If the Celtics lose, Tatum gets the blame. If they win, it's all celebration. He gets all the cheers because that's what it is when you're the best player on the best team in the NBA. That's how it is. That's how it works. I mean, we can all agree the Celtics are a better team talent-wise. We all can all agree on that.
Yeah, no, top to bottom, I don't disagree. I think it's on the third option though, right? I don't think Boston and Jaylen Brown has played phenomenal, as is Al Horford, and those are your second and third options. But again, it's not a consistent threat, right? Al Horford is not liable to be a guy who's going to nail down shots every time. Jaylen Brown is a guy who's not liable to nail down spot up looks every time. And so when Tatum is doing what he's doing, which is drive and dish, he's almost got to be a little more cautious, I feel like, right? So there's that thought in your mind. I think that is what leading to a lot of his turnovers, right? I think it's less on Tatum and more so just this thought that, does Jayson want to do it himself, or does he want to attract guys and then dish, which he's been doing? But there's a second guessing thought in my mind to him, in his mind, if that makes any sense. I don't think he thinks he knows what's best for the team, him taking over or him allowing other people to take over for him on his drive and dishes. I just think that's where a lot of the turnovers are coming, because there's not this 100% fully fledged confidence in his options. And I think that could be blasphemous to say, but I stand by that. I think it's got more to do with the roster around him and how they're so young and unused to this environment that there's no one you can consistently rely upon. And so now when they're doubling Tatum in the lane, he's got a dish, but you almost can't trust those guys that you're dishing to, I think, if you're Jayson. That's to me, he's almost second guessing his own decisions.
Well, why
not take over?
You have those other guys, though. You've seen the likes of Jaylen Brown and even some of the secondary guys step up offensively, not to the point where they're dropping 30 balls, but they have produced good contributions in certain games, and have shown that they can really have that sort of secondary help for him. Because you've seen Tatum, I think, move away from some of his more hurtful tendencies when it comes to just kind of playing to score the ball at any given point in the game. It's a good thing to have that sort of takeover mentality, but it can't be the default. He has to be able to recognize that it's the finals. You're playing against another top team in the league that has watched film. They know how the team's system generally works. And I think he did that early on. When you were looking at his assist numbers, his turnovers weren't like consistently up game to game. Like I said, he showed flashes of being able to say, hey, I can rely on my teammates while still finding my own spots within the flow of the offense. And Game 5, I wanted to ask you guys, what more do you want from him holistically? Because I just gave you the numbers as far as his percentages went, his numbers with the points, with the rebounds. I'm not exactly sure what his assists were, but that's overall a good game from your top option and you still lose by 10 points.
Well, Jake, real quick. You were about to make the point that I think you wanted him to take over more.
Yeah,
right?
take over.
So that's what you want.
All NBA first team, take it. You want it like Kobe, he wants to go on this whole thing about Kobe and how it's the Mo mentality. He's wearing, the Kobe outfits, the armbands, the elbow band, whatever it's called, right? And he's doing that, and he's amplifying this Mamba persona and trying to, I don't want to say be like Kobe, but kind of what he's trying to do, right? Be like Kobe and do what he did. Well, Kobe takes over. When you need a basket and you're down by 10 with 5 minutes to go and in the fourth quarter in the NBA Finals, Kobe gets you back in that game. So if you want to tell me you want to be Kobe and you want to amplify this whole Mamba mentality, go do it. Show me. Don't stop telling me about it. Do it. And I'm just going to pose this question right here. Are the Celtics fatigued, both physically and mentally? And is that okay? And I think this answer is pretty simple. They are. Physically and mentally, this team is fatigued. And physically, there's no excuse for it. NBA player, when you look at this series between both teams, they both had to travel. They both played these long games. It's been a grueling playoff run for both of these teams. And that's unexcusable for the Celtics to say, hey, we're physically fatigued. Let's just pack it in, and we're going to have a poor Game 5 performance, right? But what I will give them and excuse them for is their mental fatigueness. Because we said this going into the series, that Golden State is a more experienced team at its core. And that's okay for Boston to say, listen, we haven't been here yet. We're still trying to figure it out. Our core is much younger. We don't know what we're doing yet. And that's okay to have that. But what's not okay is when you miss all these free throws in Game 5 and the turnovers start to pile up, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a deep hole going back to Boston down 3-2 when you could have closed them out in Game 4. That's what's not okay.
I don't think we need to overreact like that, though, because obviously both teams are fatigued. It's we're heading into Game 6 of the NBA Finals, and we're at the peak of this season. It's a long season.
But is that an excuse? Because it seems like that's becoming an excuse right now for the Celtics, that they're just physically fatigued and that's it.
I don't think it needs to be an excuse. I mean, they dropped a Game 5 on the road in Golden State. Keep in mind, right, the Warriors have been extremely successful at home the entire postseason. So when they picked up home court advantage, all right, by taking one in Boston, that was huge for them. Okay, so I think some of the credit really has to be relayed to Golden State taking that back into their own hands, because now, as I mentioned,
that's the thing.
Start off the show.
No, how did they take it back, though? If you look at the Celtics, right, 5 minutes to go in Game 4, all those missed shots, they couldn't get a basket to save their lives, and all of a sudden they lose Game 4, and then they basically have a no-show in the first half of Game 5, and then just lose it all in the fourth quarter. Golden State didn't get back in it themselves. It was all Boston doing it. Boston let Golden State back into the series, if you look at it.
Well, I'd agree with that as far as the little things go, because we talked about how they didn't shoot very well from the free throw line, and they turned the ball over too much. There's a lot of simple things that, for them as a team, need to be cleaned up, and it doesn't need to be all on the weight of one guy's shoulders. That's why I'm having a hard time subscribing to the notion that Jayson Tatum needs to take over, be the Mamba, because I don't think he is that right now. He's a top option for a really good team that we've noted on multiple occasions that has those secondary options, maybe not consistently. Obviously, when you got Grant Williams, Derek White, those kinds of guys that didn't really show up in Game 5, that hurts a team like Boston. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he goes into Game 6 back at home and tries to redefine how this team has played and how this team has played when they've been successful on the offensive end of the floor. I think they've been most successful when they're moving the ball around, when Brown and Tatum aren't taking turns, but they're finding their opportunities within the flow of the offense. Okay, and that just allows them to not have the ball stick, because when the ball sticks, the defense can pack in. It makes it a lot easier on Golden State. And by virtue of that, it's not like a direct cause and effect, but that also can allow the Golden State defense to really hone in on passing lanes, focus on trying to force the turnovers that they are really good at taking advantage of on the other end. And so when I opened the show with saying that Boston is going back home, I think they take game 6 and this goes to 7. That was me trying to tell you guys that I'm not overreacting to this game 5 loss. They lost in Golden State. Golden State, again, has been that team that takes care of business at home. And that's why I was kind of surprised when they let one go through the first 2. But they took care of business. And at the end of the day, that is like the basic way to look at this. And I don't think you need to necessarily put it on they're fatigued, they're packing it in. I think they go back home. The crowd at Boston is going to re-energize them. I think they try and find a way to pull that one out. Now, as far as their hopes to pull out a game 7 in Golden State, that's a different story. But this series is far from over.
Going back real quick, Jake. Go ahead.
I just don't understand this notion. Like, no, you're saying that Tatum doesn't need to take over. He doesn't need to have that alpha kind of mama mentality, whatever, right? And I agree with that it's the Celtics have had success moving the ball around and that driving kick out kind of play style. But if you're the best player on the best team, you have to take over. There's no excuse there. And you look at his first half, he had 13 points and he was a -9 on the floor in 21 minutes of play, almost 22. Like, that's inexcusable. If you're the best player, he got outplayed by Andrew Wiggins in game 5. Jayson Tatum, all NBA first team. He got outplayed by Andrew Wiggins. That can't happen. If you're the best player on the team, you gotta meet that. Okay, all-star starter. That's wonderful.
Everyone got outplayed last night in game 5 by Andrew Wiggins, though. That guy showed up.
Jayson Tatum didn't, and the Celtics did not. Like, I just don't understand this notion of just letting that go.
I think somehow here, I'm with Jake. Like, I agree. I think Boston are at their best when they are moving the ball, taking their rocks, and Brown and Tatum aren't taking their turns, as Noah said on the dot, right? That being said, Jayson Tatum, sometimes he can't take turns. Sometimes, and him taking over can still be him driving and dishing and facilitating the offense, which he has done. Him taking over means, in my mind, he needs to flip the switch. And he needs to take over and lead the offense and not just be the leader of the offense, but grab the offense by the scruff of the neck and say, all right, my decisions, my team, I'm going to take over. If I pass you the ball, it's because I know you can make the shot. Take the shot if you're open or move the rock if you can't, right? That's what I think I want when I want Jayson Tatum to take over. It doesn't have to be 55 points in back-to-back games in game 6 and game 7 if they win game 6, right? But it needs to be 25 points, 10 assists, like 8 boards. It needs to be him getting through the offense and facilitating in a way that we know he can, and not him kind of not running through the motions, because he's not, right? But it needs to be him more confidently making decisions. It needs to be him not making a decision because he's doubled, but making a decision because it's the right decision. Like, if he drives into the lane and passes the ball, it's not just because he's got 2 guys on him and this guy's moving the ball to is wide open. It needs to be the decision because he knows in his head that he's calculated that's the right pass, right? If Grant Williams is wide open in the corner, if the score's 94-91 and Grant Williams is wide open in the corner to make it 97-91 and he's doubled, he needs to know that the decision is, okay, I'm going to drive and I'm going to try and get a layup or a foul or an and one opportunity, or I'm going to kick and Grant's going to make the shot. Not Grant might make the shot because he's open. He needs to know Grant is going to make the shot. And if he doesn't know Grant is going to make the shot, he needs to drive and get to the line, or at least try to. That's what I think I want from Jayson Tatum, is a decision-making process of, I'm going to lead the offense, not I'm going to be the supposed leader of the offense. There's a slight difference there.
Well, if that's how you're defining it, that's fine. What I got from Jake was that he needed to take over and take 25, 30 shots in these next couple of games, respectively, to be able to lift Boston and do it in the way that Kobe would have did it. I understand that he tries to model his game after that, but he isn't Kobe. Okay,
well, and I'm not saying he is. I'm not saying he's Kobe, but my point, Noah, is that if you look at the alphas, right, and those all NBA first team guys and those guys that are legit dudes in this league, your Giannis's, your LeBrons, your Steph's to an extent, right? You look at those players, they all take over in their moment, right? This is Jayson Tatum's moment. If he's going to be all NBA first team and he's going to be out there a top 5 player in the league, he has to take over. And there's no excuse for that. It's the players' league. You win by your best player. Your best player sets the tone. And if Tatum can't do that, the Celtics are going to crumble. That's how it's going to work.
Let me ask you, Jake, from Ime Udoka's perspective, okay, leading the team the way he did on the journey that this team went on, struggling to start and really picking things up towards the latter stages, or I guess you could just say the second half of the season, regular season, and then through postseason. Why would he choose to jeopardize that for the sake of the way that I'm seeing it, the legacy of a particular player? Because in my eyes, Jayson Tatum is still top guy. Okay, I'm not saying that he needs to take a back seat to anyone.
Of course.
I'm just saying that he doesn't need to take 4-5 levels above every one of his teammates, because that's not how he played. That's not how Boston was successful. And so when it comes down to it, it's so late in the season. You're literally there are 2 games potentially left in this NBA season, and you're 2 wins away from taking the NBA Finals victory. You're not going to try and overreact or panic and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to change it up because we're on this stage, right? We're going to do things differently because this is when players rise up, or this is when your top guys rise up. It's not like that. He can rise up within the system that has already been well established by Udoka and has been proven to give this team wins. That's what I'm saying is it doesn't need to be a whole like, okay, now this is what's going to happen. They're not going to try and rework everything that has been going right for them just because of a Game 5 loss at Golden State. You know what I'm saying?
First off, your coaching in this league only gets you so far, right? Udoka and Kerr, great coaches. We can sit here and say those are 2 really good coaches this season, right? But those guys, with all due respect to them, they're not going to change how this series plays out anymore. Because you get to a point in this league and at this point of the season where the ball needs to be in the best player's hand, and they're going to go duel. And whoever plays better that's the team that's going to come on top. Go back and look at all those LeBron finals. LeBron had the ball in his hands, dominated, he won. Even the Spurs, Tim Duncan had the ball. And I know that, you can say Tony Parker kind of set him up or whatever, but who scored? Who was the guy that facilitated that and was the guy? Tim Duncan. And, and there's countless other examples in the league if you go back and look at it. Tatum needs to be that guy. And Curry's done that for the Warriors, and that's why they hold a 3-2 series lead heading back to Boston. Tatum needs to do that for the next 2 games.
No. Who had the winning shot in the Cavaliers 3-1 comeback? Oh, my God.
Yeah, Kyrie did. Of course he did.
Kyrie, what did LeBron do?
The chase down block.
Decision. He made the right decision. At the end of the day, right? I think Tatum has to take more shots. I do. But I also, I will stand, again, Noah is not wrong. I'm still with the mindset of, hey, I think Tatum needs to take more. But also, I think that Tatum needs to take more because simply, I think that's the best decision he can make right now, is get himself to the line, drive, and take his own shots, attract defenders. I mean, it's tough because they're shooting threes, right? And they're struggling at that. And it's a lot of Wiggins defensively. And let's give credit to Draymond Green. Obviously, you can give credit to Draymond Green after he had his best game of the series in Game 5, right? But let's not forget this. Draymond Green has been dominant against the Celtics' big 3 of Smart, Brown, and Tatum. They're shooting like 25% when they're guarded by Draymond. Like, defensively, it has been tough. Golden State has made it tricky. It's a different Golden State team, and I think that's been the biggest thing for Boston to adjust to, is it's just like they're hounding him. Wiggins is a defensive, like, beast almost, you could say. Draymond is Draymond, right? When they get guys in the game, Thompson can still defend at a high level. Curry even does his own thing at somewhat of a high level. I think this Golden State team has got overshadowed by their offense in their heyday, where they were really, really dominant when they made 5 straight finals or whatever it was and won 4 and just rocked and rolled because their offense was so explosive. The Splash Brothers were so explosive. Durant was so explosive. Where this team is sort of taken a little bit more of the mantle is, we're going to defend our asses off and we're going to be really, really good at what we do. And I think Andrew Wiggins has been vital to that. And that has generated, going back to that fatigue question you asked a while ago, that's generated a lot of that physical and mental fatigue. It's obviously the fact that Boston have played a lot of games in this postseason, and they've had to play a lot of very important games, because you go back to January, Boston was 19-21. Since then, they finished the season 32-10. Every single one of those games mattered. All 42 of those games mattered because of how they started the season. So they've really been playing almost an NBA Finals type atmosphere, or an NBA playoffs type atmosphere, since early January, because every game is so important. You need guys every single night because they started so poorly. And I think that is where this fatigue has come about. And that's where the struggles at times and the inconsistencies have come about. And Noah's right to not overreact. And I'm not overreacting, but I'm also starting to see some of it, right? You watch Boston the first 3 or 4 games and they look solid at times. The turnovers happened, but again, when every game since early January has had to be treated almost like a playoff game because you start 19-21, it's almost impressive, right, that Boston is here and still kicking about and competing in games. I don't yet know what's going to happen in game 6, but all I know is I think somebody needs to step up in green, whether it's Tatum, who's the likely option because of how up and down he's been, or it's Brown, who's been consistently pretty solid, or it's Horford, who's been consistently pretty solid at a level below Brown, or it's someone like a Derek White or a Marcus Smart. Shoot, Luke Cornett even. Somebody needs to step up, right? And that's the only way they win. And I think Golden State don't have the best roster, but they've got the more level-headed and experienced and also healthier roster. They're not as worn down by the grind of the NBA season as this Boston team is. And I think that's where the Warriors have the advantage.
I also want to bring this up. You brought back, circling back to January. 2 nights ago now, was the first time the Celtics lost back-to-back games since January. They haven't lost back-to-back games since then. And you circle back, you kind of pose that question too as well with Jayson Tatum stepping up. It's nobody else in the team needs to step up. Jayson Tatum has to step up. That's the answer to that question. It's Jayson Tatum and only Tatum.
They lost back-to-back games to Toronto and Miami in late March. That's it, though. They lost 115 to Toronto, and they lost by 8 to Miami. That's it.
Back to March. Yeah.
Even so, that's still unbelievably impressive. You can't fault that at all. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I think I blanked on that earlier. I was mentioning how they were going to come back and kind of bounce back, but I just don't see them losing 3 straight to end the series.
That's a good point.
Just going with the stat here. But I wanted to bring up something that Jake mentioned right at the beginning of his last sort of spiel. You said Ime Udoka, Steve Kerr, they're not their impact on how this next game, and then depending on how that goes, maybe a game 7 would turn out. They're limited as far as how that goes, because now the players at this stage, it's a lot more on their shoulders. Well, what I'm trying to get at with Udoka, that point is that he's not going to overcoach, but he's going to try and maintain a sense of consistency with what has worked for them. He's not going to want Tatum to go and overextend himself because let's keep in mind here, this past game, Steph Curry, as great as he's been throughout the series, obviously had an off night. He got contributions from Wiggins, who was especially great, but he also had points from Gary Payton, Jordan Poole chipped in, and then you look at Boston's side. Okay, Tatum had a good game, in my opinion, as far as when you're looking at just his plain stat line. You look at that and you don't say the guy played terrible, like he shit the bed. I don't think you look at that and you come away with that conclusion. Instead, you look at Grant Williams, Derek White, and Peyton Pritchard combining to shoot 1 for 9 from the field and 0 for 7 from 3-point land. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that you want to get those guys involved, because when they have been successful, that has uplifted the entire team. When everyone is getting involved, and it doesn't even need to be on the offensive end, and it can be on the defensive side. And that's why their identity on that end, when they're not turning the ball over and they can consistently get into their half court set on defense, that really keeps every single player engaged with a role, knowing that they can contribute in that way. So that whole mindset of trying to keep everyone alert and focused and locked into the game, I think that's extremely important for the Celtics team, because as you've seen on both sides, you've had great performances from top players. You've had Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, that one of the nights they basically went back and forth between the two of them. You've had Steph, he's been great. But it's those other performers that when they've stepped up, it's been an indicator of success for that team. And
I
for
just
game 5, it was Golden State.
Yeah, and I just think you can talk about the rotational players, and you can talk about the bench players and the coaching. I just don't think any of that matters at this point. You know, your coaching is able to set the culture, right, and set the tone for the season. And if there's, you know, in Udoka's case, he's been able to make a crazy midseason turnaround and get the team that was, you know, contending for a top lottery pick into the NBA Finals. That's unheard of, right? So I'm not saying the coaches are not important at all in the season. I'm just saying at this level, at this point in the finals and in the postseason, the coaching matchup just doesn't matter. It comes down to your star player, and that's Jayson Tatum and Steph Curry. And if the Celtics are going to win on Thursday, Jayson Tatum needs to have the best game that he's had in his postseason career. That's just how it needs to be. And I'm not saying he needs to have 60-plus points or something stupid like that. But you need to leave Game 6 and say to yourself, oh, my God, Jayson Tatum was the best player on the floor, and it was without a doubt he was that. He was good defensively. He was passing well, rebounding, scoring, the whole 9 yards, right? And you need to go into Game 7 with that level of confidence and say, you know, when it's 100-100, games on the line, Tatum has the ball. Tatum's going to take that shot. He's going to make it. He just has to take over these next 2 games. And like I said, he's in that level now of top 5 players. There's no excuse anymore. Top 5 players and best players in this league take over in these moments. It's a player-driven league. It always will been, always has been. Tatum, it's his moment to shine. He needs to do it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I just have to disagree, because if it mattered before, it still matters now. Nothing has changed. This team is still the same team that saw the kind of success that they did towards the second half of the season and throughout the postseason.
I'm just saying, what is Udoka or Kerr going to do, Wednesday night or Tuesday night to change their game plan for Thursday? What can they
Nothing.
do? This isn't football where you can change your game plan and, or we're going to cover this guy differently. We're going to have this kind of defensive scheme. You're pretty much stuck with what you got. You can't do anything.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. You want to be like that. You don't want to try and reinvent the wheel because you dropped one in Game 5 and now you feel like there's certain things that need to be adjusted for in Game 6. Of course, that's the case, but that's simply looking at little things as far as the turnovers, free throw line. It doesn't need to be, hey, you're our best player. It's all on you to basically, and I know you're not saying it's all on him, but a lot of
it kind of is though. Like
game.
That's how the playoffs work. How many times have we seen, going back, this is so long ago now, 2008, Paul Pierce doing with LeBron James. We've gone back and looked at it. We've seen more recent memory, LeBron James going up against, if we want to say Tatum rookie season, that Game 7 where Tatum kind of just popped off for that whole postseason. I don't want to compare that to Paul Pierce, LeBron James, but you know what I'm saying? Like we've seen before, Kevin Durant up against Steph Curry and later on before he went to Golden State, right? You look at these guys and you say in these moments, when everything's said and done, it comes down to the best player on each respective team butting heads, and whoever wins is usually because that star player had a better series, had a better game. And I'm just saying, if that's what's going to happen in Game 6 and 7, and if Tatum fails in the moment, if the lights are too bright and he lays an egg tomorrow night, you're going to look at it and say, Tatum's great. He's a great player. Maybe the lights just got a little bit too bright, and that's okay. He's young. He's got time. And I'm not saying that's the end of the world. But at the end of the day, it's your star player determines what happens. It's a player league. It always has been and always will be. It doesn't matter what your role players do, what your coaches do. The star player needs to show up.
Does he have time though?
He's got 2 games left.
But I'm saying, does he have time if it doesn't go his way in this postseason? We bring that up so often.
I'm not saying it's a guarantee he gets back there, but you got to think okay, it's and maybe it's a good point, Ryan, right? Because maybe 5 years from now we look back and say, damn, that was a missed opportunity.
That Celtics team, man, that the people you could totally look back at this group and go, that Celtics team. They were good. They had a chance. Wonder if they'd won that series since then. Nothing. You could totally look back and say,
I mean, they become the next Oklahoma City Thunder from the early 2010s.
Is this Celtics team that good? I think only 2 teams in NBA history have lost 9 postseason games and won a championship. The Lakers in '88 and the Celtics in '08 are the only 2 teams I'm pretty sure that have lost 9 games in a postseason and walked away with rings. Boston have 9 losses now. They swept Brooklyn. They then beat Milwaukee in 7. They then beat Miami in 7. They're now down 3-2 after 5. I don't know if this Boston team is comparable to the '08 Boston team, nor is it comparable to the '88 Lakers led by James Worthy, right? So that becomes a question. Is this Boston team really good enough to win 2 games on the bounce against a Golden State team that clearly knows what they're doing, right? I'm just not sure even if the fatigue goes away and Tatum drops 40 in both games, I'm just not sure that this Boston team has everything that it really needs to have in order to overcome and do something that really only 2 of the top 25 teams in NBA history, 2 of the top 20 NBA teams in history have ever done, which is win rings while losing 9 games in a postseason.
I will just say, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you look at who they played, they've had a really tough road to get to the playoffs, right? And I'm not saying that it's, not comparable to other teams that have got to the finals and have won. But I mean, Celtics space, obviously Brooklyn, they swept, they didn't lose a game too, but a very tough series against Milwaukee and then really tough one against Miami, right? And I think we all knew going into those series that those were both 7-game series, right? And I think the other thing too, if you're Boston, you don't want to bet on this because then you get into like this really bad area. But what if Golden State showed up in Game 6 tomorrow, and let's say Boston comes out and they have those really hot quarters that they had a lot in the postseason, and they jump out to say a 20-point lead in the first half, would it be out of question to say the Warriors go, we're going back to San Francisco, Bay Area's Game 7, we'll be fine. Let's just pack this one in. We'll start the plane. We're heading back. I wouldn't put that past Golden State. And then when you're playing like that, and you're just thinking we're just going to go win at home in Game 7, we'll go back home anyways. That's playing with fire. And I could totally see that happening. And Boston just saying, no, screw you guys. We're going to win on your floor. I could totally see that happening if it's, happens in that scenario.
Jake, I have a question. A quick question for you. So we're all aware of the arc that this team has been on, right? The sort of switch that they flipped in the regular season to now be as far as they are right now. Was that because Jayson Tatum had a knack for taking over, being that Mamba night in and night out? Or was it more because of the kind of defensive identity that they built and took pride in, along with the elevated confidence that some of their role guys had gotten from the success that they started to see? I feel like that when you think about this Celtics team, you understand what's at the top. Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, all of that. But their success seems to correlate more with how the other guys pick them up. That's why I'm having a difficulty saying Tatum needs to go and do more. I think what Boston needs from him is consistency to be the top option and play like that. But it's not a matter of going out and trying to be that iconic performer in the finals. I feel like that can get him in trouble and can really throw the Celtics into a loop, because that's not how they've gotten their wins when they've been successful.
Let's just take this question, right? We'll put it to the '08 Celtics, right? The last Celtics team to win the finals, right? That was a very team-oriented team. They had a lot of team slogans, very up and at it, right? And you look down that roster, you obviously had the big three, Pierce, Allen, and Garnett. Then Rondo and Perkins were kind of filled out the starting lineup. And then that bench, your Leon Pose, Eddie House, all the way down, PJ Brown, like all those guys, right? And that was a team-oriented team, right? But if you go back and you look at that postseason, especially when they played Cleveland and then Detroit and then LA, Pierce started to take over. And it was Pierce's postseason run. It was Pierce's team, and it was always Pierce's team. But my point is, it was Pierce that took over, right? And it was without a doubt that Pierce was the best player on the floor in the finals, in the conference finals, in the semifinals. We haven't seen Tatum do that yet. And he has 2 games left to do it. And that's my point is that, yes, you can get to this point and be a team-oriented play style. You can have that. But at the end of the day, at this level, at this point in the season, your best player has to take over. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying Tatum needs to score 60 points and have 20 rebounds. But you need to look at him and say, yeah, he was dominant, and he dominated everybody tonight. He had 25, 30 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. Like, he was a dog tonight. That's what you need from
emotionally. You need to understand emotionally that he took over, right? I think, is that what you're trying to say? Like,
yeah, emotionally too. I mean, I wasn't going that direction, but that's a good point as well. Like, emotionally, Pierce put that 08 Celtics team on his back, and I think he had more help. I think Garnett and Allen were much better pieces compared to Brown and Smart. I think that's, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue that, right? But if you look at it, Pierce put the 08 Celtics on his back and said, all right, let's go. I'm taking you guys to the promised land. We're going to win this thing. Tatum has to do that. He hasn't done it. I haven't seen him do it a lot this postseason, but he has 2 games left to do it. And if he doesn't do it and they don't get back here, we're going to be saying that was a good team. They probably should have won that year, and then they just never got back there. Kind of like we do with the OKC Thunder back in 2012.
I think the closest we get to finding a middle here is that I feel like Tatum, Brown, Steph on the other side. I feel like when you look at those guys, right, it's those kinds of players you'll expect to take over in the timely moments. But from in the 48-minute game, it's not about that. It's about making sure you can find those opportunities when you need to, not trying to force the issue, because I think if he goes about forcing the issue, that's going to lead to turnovers, as we've already kind of talked about, will be a massive problem for Boston in game 6 or 7 or whatever, because that already has been a bane when they've been on the losing end of things.
But if he takes over and he has that strong performance, those turnovers aren't there. Like I feel like you and I are kind of saying different things, where I'm just saying, like, listen, he has to take over and he has to be the best player on the floor, right? Those turnovers aren't there at that point. Once he starts turning the ball over, that's when you start to lose it, because now he's not the best player on the floor anymore. He's having, 5 turnovers or whatever it is, right? That means you're not having a good game at that point.
The way that I'm understanding how we've kind of gone about this conversation is that with Tatum, telling him that he needs to be the best guy, he needs to step up, have the mama mentality. At least initially, I know kind of Ryan put the caveat in there as far as like just being the primary facilitator or playmaker for that matter, not necessarily taking 10 or 13 more shots. But what I'm trying to say is that Tatum doesn't need to do much more than what he's done when this team has been successful. And you've kind of seen that. I have a question. How much more did he need to do in game 5 to push this team over the top? Because I agree, he needed to show up more in the fourth quarter, because he was don't turn the ball over. But that's a team thing. It's not a Tatum thing.
But that's all Boston has to do. For me, at least, that's all they have to do. We just talked about how they've got the better roster, top to bottom, 1 through 15, 1 through 12, even 1 through whatever, 8 or 9, the guys who see the court. I think 1 through 9, the guys who are going to touch the court even for 2 seconds to give Tatum a breather. Boston has the better roster. Where Golden State hasn't beat is that experience and that level of fatigue and the understanding of the bright lights and all that. And really where we've seen Boston lose games, and that's 3 of them now in this series, is when they've turned the rock over. That is all they've got to do, is just do not give the ball to the Golden State Warriors. And I think in game 6, if they fix that, that's a win. In game 7, it becomes a little different, because I don't know if Golden State is going to – game 7, it becomes a little different, where you're going to need you're going to need to not turn the rock over, and you're also going to need somebody to take over. But game 6, if they don't turn the ball over and they play good Celtic basketball that we've seen them play under Ime Udoka on this second half stretch that they've been on, they force a game 7. But that is the key, is it's for Tatum, don't turn the ball over. For Brown, don't turn the ball over. For Horford, for Smart, Don't turn the ball over. For Pritchard, when he gets in, don't turn the ball over. For Williams, etc. All those guys, maintain the ball. Keep the ball.
That's my point, though. It's about those sorts of things, correcting that, emphasizing that in this next game 6, more than it is about Jayson Tatum trying to have a legacy game.
Yeah.
And how do you avoid situations that breed turnovers? You don't let the ball stick. You trust your teammates, and you find the scoring opportunities within the flow of the offense. Get good spacing, and that's when lanes open up for easy, high percentage looks on drives. Basically, all of those baskets around the hoop. Those are the kinds of points that when Boston has gotten them consistently, they're hard to stop.
And you're right. You're 1,000% right on that. But Jayson Tatum can be that guy while still doing all that, and the Celtics following that path. I'm just telling you, no matter how the Celtics play, like, I think, you're spot on, right? They got to limit the turnovers, and you do that exactly how you listen, right? But with that being said, Tatum needs to be the best player when the Celtics play like that in this point of the season. And if he's not, if he has another 12-point performance like game 1 and the Celtics pull through, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, Tatum, great player, phenomenal player, really talented guy. But when the lights get bright and the spotlight's on him, did he show up? Or did he kind of lose it and kind of fade into the background and, I don't want to say choke, but kind of choked it away a little bit? I mean, and I'm not saying that he needs to do this to have this legacy point in his game. I'm just saying, like, these next 2 games are so important for him because it could change how we look at it. Because right now, I mean, you just rank out the 5 players in the finals, right? I mean, I just did it really quick. Curry, Brown, Wiggins, Rob Williams, and Tatum. Those are my top 5 right now in the finals, if you look at it, right? Tatum's 5. He's 5. What has he done to be higher than those 4 guys?
I don't
that's my point.
The list. I got a real quick question for both of y'all, right? Because clearly there's opposite ends of the spectrum that are almost really on the same end of the spectrum at the same time, right? Jake, what's a good stat line for Tatum game 6? Considering the W comes, and what's a stat line that allowed you to that in your mind said, other than the win, Jayson Tatum showed up?
27 points, at least 10 rebounds, and say 7 assists.
How many turnovers?
While keeping the turnovers down, like say under 2 turnovers.
Noah, what's a good stat line for Tatum considering they get the W in game 6? What tells you that he played well?
So one thing, Jake, I wanted to clarify, what are his averages for the series again?
His averages
23 points something,
23,
and then like 7 and 7.
Yeah, basically 23, 7 and 7, yeah.
23, 7 and 7. Honestly,
what's his turnovers though?
That and 2 turnovers.
What's the average in turnovers in the 5 games?
It was 3.6.
Yeah,
so he needs to drop that by about 2.
Yeah, he needs to have under 2 turnovers.
Yeah. So,
but if you look at it too, sorry, no, real quick, I don't mean to cut you off, but if you just look at his minus 13, he hasn't been in the plus side in a lot of these games. I mean, he was plus 36 in game 1, minus 36 in game 2, plus 13, plus 1, and minus 13. His player efficiency rating has not been that good this entire finals. 15.3, just to put it out there.
When you look at how drastically different, did you say plus 36, minus 36 for games 1 and 2?
Game 2 minus 36, game 3 plus 13.
Game 3 no. You said
a plus. It sounded like you said a plus 36 in there.
Plus
I'm sorry,
36,
minus 36. I'm sorry. Okay, game 1 was plus 16. Then game 2 is minus 36. Then a plus 13, plus 1, and a minus 13.
Okay.
My apologies.
Plus minus is a flawed stat. It doesn't necessarily.
In a way,
it is a flawed stat though, because
in a way,
when you're looking at the
right.
minus
I don't want to let the
36.
Nerds win.
Well, I mean, you look at how overwhelming that one game of a minus 36 was when they basically got smoked. I feel like that is like tipping the scales a little bit too much for it to be a genuine sort of, hey, look, Tatum has been more detrimental than as far as the plus minus stat goes. It really just comes down to Tatum doing what he knows has worked for him, for the Celtics. I think the averages of 23, 7 and 7 don't do too much. Find those points, the 23 points within the flow of the offense, and be able to trust those other guys to step up, fill in the gaps behind you, because that's how they've won games.
You know where
that's how I'm looking at it.
Do you know where that average got the Celtics, Noah? In a 3-2 hole.
Say that again.
Do you know where those averages and that stat line that Tatum has had through this series? You know where that's gotten them? In a 3-2 hole. Like, that's just how it's.
Is it a 3-2 hole though? They're going back home. The series is going at this point. Boston's going.
Okay, yeah, they're going back home, sure. But I'm just saying, if they lose tomorrow night or they lose Game 7, you're gonna look back and say, Tatum just didn't have that good of a finals. He didn't play the best that he could have possibly played at, right? Especially in in games 2 and then really kind of that first half of Game 5, right? But even when they needed him most in Game 4, when they're up by 5 with like about 5 minutes to go, they needed him. Just didn't show up. And and it's not just Tatum. You go back and look, Smart missed, I think it was 2 or 3 threes. Brown and Horford missed some free throws and threes as well. And then you go back to Game 5. He had 2 air balls in the fourth quarter. What?
He wasn't good. He wasn't good in the fourth.
A star doesn't have 2 air balls, let alone in the fourth quarter. Like, it just doesn't happen.
I feel like that would be the point. Is like he was terrible in the fourth in Game 5. I give you that. I give you that. He was not. He didn't play well.
I just say if it happens in the fourth.
Go ahead.
I just say if it happens in the fourth quarter, you had a bad finals. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you only watch the fourth quarter, but that's when push comes to shove. If you're going to win, you do it in the fourth quarter.
When that air ball hit and you could just hear the deflation in the voice of Mike Breen, he missed it by about a foot. That was when you knew that he just didn't play very well. He could have shot 19 for 19 and had 45, and he missed that big shot and he missed it bad, and you would have gone, missed it in the wrong spot. That was the thing for me. It was just like, he's got to show up as well and in the big spots. And it doesn't have to be just Tatum, as Jake said. You can put the emphasis on a guy like Al Horford. If Al Horford misses a couple of shots down the stretch, no one's really going to look at it in a microscope like we would if it was Tatum, but he still deserves the same view, right? It's like they gave it to this guy in the last 5 minutes and he didn't produce. If that happens tomorrow and they lose, Jake's right. Like, people are going to look at this and go, Jayson Tatum kind of struggled, right? I mean, to me, Game 6 is very important because we don't know what we're going to get out of Boston. I know what I'm going to get out of Golden State. I feel like I'm going to get a consistent performance from the role players. I'm going to get a defensive effort from Green and Wiggins, and I'm probably going to get a rebound game from Steph. And if you don't get a rebound game from Steph and Boston loses back-to-back games with Steph Curry having struggled in games 5 and 6, then you go, okay, yeah, Boston missed an opportunity or two, really. And again, with Golden State, I know what I'm going to get. I'll keep saying it. You're going to get solid performances from the role players. You're going to get a defensive effort from Draymond Green, who's going to be a pest and frankly an asshole all night long. He's going to be in everybody's face. You're going to get Andrew Wiggins being a pest and a defensive menace. Maybe not an asshole, but he's going to be annoying, right? And you're probably going to get a Stephen Curry bounce back. And if you don't get that, right, that's what happens. And if you don't get that from Golden State, Boston have to win. And even if you do get that from Golden State, again, Boston have to win. But I just don't know what I'm getting with Boston always. I know what I'm getting with Steve Kerr's Warriors.
Also, just to throw this out there, I want to do I want to do a little Jeopardy thing. I thought it was a funny stat.
Man. Oh, my gosh.
He just has it off the dome.
It just proved my point, so I figured I might as well pull it up.
Okay. Cool.
Prove your point.
I was going to say, let Noah go first. Okay. Jayson Tatum. And most playoff turnovers in NBA history. What's the over-under? 95 turnovers in this playoff run. That's the most in league history. He beat out LeBron James in 2018, who had 94. He had 95 turnovers in this playoff run.
There's a key theme there of usage.
Sure.
Like a whole lot of usage as well. So
third on the list is Dwayne Wade in 2006. So yeah, usage, that's a good point, Ryan, right? But no one's gonna look at this and say, Jayson Tatum usage was through the roof. They're gonna look at that and say, Oh, Tatum, 95 turnovers. Oh my God, he choked. That was terrible. He's also terrible in the playoffs.
He also has a whole lot of points, a whole lot of assists, and a whole lot of boards.
Of course.
So stats again.
If he has another game 6 where he just turns the ball over and the Celtics turn the ball over, you're gonna say, well, he just couldn't take care of the rock, and that's what happened. They lost because of it.
I know. Make your point. I'm done with Jake.
Taking care of the rock is not something that Tatum does on his own. The way that he takes care of the rock more, puts himself in better situations on the offensive end, is not by pushing the issue, not by trying to be the hero, but trusting his teammates. I've gone through that sort of line multiple times throughout. And just by the way, his performance in the fourth, in game 6, and a possible game 7, I think you look at that and you can be critical, especially critical of that, comparing it or contrasting it to how he was in game 5, because I agree. He didn't play up to how he needed to. But that combined with the fact that I'm looking at this stat here, it just popped out to me. Golden State finished with a 31-4 edge in bench scoring. That also can't happen. And I think it's a lot of looping factors that for Boston can be alleviated, at least most of them, if they continue to if they try and return back to the identity of, we have top guys, but it's as much as they're going to carry and maybe the scoring department or whatnot, they're going to have to do that in a certain way that doesn't isolate themselves from the rest of the team.
I agree with that, Noah. I mean, like I said, I think Tatum just needs to show up and just play well in these next 2 games. They can kind of be big games for him. But kind of move on here to the final take. Get out one last take that didn't make it onto the show discussion-wise. So I got one. It's so refreshing to see the referees swallowing their whistles and limiting the amount of fouls. I'm not saying they're like ignoring calls. Oh my God, it's so refreshing to see when a player just flies over the floor that the referee doesn't just blow his whistle immediately. And then, or when they get a little hit in the face or the head jerks back, we got to go sit at the booth for 15 minutes to review it and see if it clarifies for a flagrant 2. Like, oh my, it is so refreshing to see that. And on the flip side, just throw it out there. Marcus Smart, please, I'm begging, stop flopping. And I say that for anybody who's falling, but Smart's been so egregious in this series when it comes to it. Did you guys see last night? I think he was on Jordan Poole, and Poole kind of like hit him just a little bit. And Marcus Smart flew 20 feet on the ground and just slid across the court. And then he didn't get the foul. So I think Poole ended up hitting the 3 at that point, which is a huge momentum swing. It's like, Smart, when you do that and you don't get the call, which you're not going to call at this point, you take yourself out of the play and you just let up these wide open shots. So please stop doing it.
What you got, Ryan?
Oh, my turn. I mean, Jake's got a good one. My final take is simply this, right? Game 6 is where you win the series if you're Boston. Yeah, you got to win game 7, but you got to win game 6 first. You got to get this one before you can get the next one. And really all there's to say is you need the best Boston Celtics performance of the year, or at the very least, the worst goal, or at least a Boston team that is forcing an awful Golden State performance in game 6. Go ahead and take that. And Ime Udoka, yeah, we talked about it earlier. Coaches aren't going to win these kind of games. These are the kind of games, the games before the game 7s, where I think a coach can have his imprint on a series, where he can come out with a plan on how to attack a team that has nothing to lose, really, right? Golden State and Boston are both in a spot where, like, hey, Golden State has more to lose. So how does Ime Udoka take that pressure on his players and start strong and transfer it into a start that is really good in game 6 that transfers all the pressure onto Golden State to close out the series on the road? That's my biggest thing, is what can Ime Udoka do to set up his guys in a very successful manner, whether it be a slight tweak in the game plan. You don't want to change everything. Noah's made that clear that he's right. And he's right about that you don't want to change everything and just say, all right, Jayson, just go do what you want, man, right? You just want to change the idea that just a little bit of a tweak to the system or what you're going to do to attack them both offensively and defensively. Change that. See how it does. Start strong in game 6. You got a really good chance of sending it back to the bank for game 7.
I'm just going to go back to it. Don't hit the panic button. Boston can't do it. I think they're not in comfortable position, but while their backs are against the walls, they're going back to Boston. And that's important. Yeah, don't turn the ball over. It's a lot of little things. I think when you look at the Celtics team, they're coming off of 2 straight losses. The extent to which you want to like psychoanalyze that and say, oh, now they're on their downfall. It's the first time they've won back-to-back since whatever. I think that just with them coming back home, getting that feel from the crowd and the energy, I think they're going to feed off of that as they've done many times throughout the postseason and just the second half of the season. It's been great. So don't hit the panic button. Stick to your identity, play good defense, limit transition opportunities by limiting turnovers. A lot of the little things that don't necessarily point to 1 or 2 players going off for 30 or 40 ball performances. I think that's what you're going to want to look for with Boston. And that's going to be successful, in my opinion, if they can figure that out in game 6. Still don't think, if we want to get into predictions here as far as transitioning, still don't think they pull out the series in 7, but I think they do push it to a 7th and get themselves back to Golden State at the very least.
So are we all under the consensus that this is going to be a game 7? This is going the distance.
I'm taking Golden State.
Golden State 6.
Taking Golden State in 6.
So my pick was Golden State in 6 too. I'm going to ride and die with it. Golden State in 6.
Boston fan.
Kind of selfishly want to see a game 7.
I do as well.
I want to see a game 7,
nice.
but I think game 6 even could be the game 7. The way it's been set up, how ugly game 5 was. That might not be a good reason, but I just feel like they're both going to come out with an increased sense of like picking themselves up, because while Golden State pulled out the win and they feel good about that, they know that they need to play a lot better to close things out. And then obviously Boston has their motives for really getting things going. So game 6, you could have potentially 2 game 7s, in my opinion. So I think we're going to have Golden State pull out this series in 7. It seems like we're all on that side here. But I think regardless, game 6 comes down to the wire. And that's refreshing considering how this series sort of started. Right, when you were looking at both teams take turns at like really having a clear advantage towards the latter half of the game, or in the latter stages of the game. That's what I'm looking forward to, at least. So for me, Golden State in 7. So
well, it's been another episode of Furtado and Seymour on the mic. Next episode, either talking about the series and what just happened, or we're talking about what's going to happen in game 7. Until then, we'll catch you guys next time.